Hi, this is Emerald and welcome to the Unmet, and today I'm going to be discussing with you 5 hidden reasons why you sabotage your goals and stand in your own way, and how shadow work can help. Okay, so like I said, in today's video, we're going to be talking about the 5 main reasons for self-sabotage. And when I say self-sabotage, what I mean is sort of standing in your own way, procrastinating, messing up chances to achieve certain goals that you want to achieve, anything that basically keeps you stuck in patterns that you don't want to be stuck in. And so we're going to be talking about how to use shadow work to resolve the underlying real reasons for that self-sabotage. Now, when we're faced with self-sabotaging behaviors, especially behaviors like procrastination, we tend to have a lot of misconceptions about that, where we think, oh, I'm just lazy, or oh, I just need better time management skills. But the reality is that behaviors like procrastination and self-sabotage and laziness and anything that falls under that umbrella are just top-level, surface-level symptoms of deeper root causes. And we can use shadow work to resolve those issues right at the roots. So in case you're new to shadow work, let me go ahead and define a little bit about what the shadow is and what shadow work is. And also I'll tell you a little bit about how the shadow tends to cause self-sabotage. So we can think of the shadow as kind of a blind spot where we just go unconscious to anything that's in that blind spot. And we tend to do that to sort of maintain homeostasis within our identity and our worldview, but we also repress those parts of ourselves away if we have like chronically unmet needs or traumas because of the intense feelings that those aspects can be associated with. And when we split these parts of ourselves away from the conscious personality and we put them in the shadow, they become autonomous from our conscious personality, and they tend to operate off of their own kind of MO, separate from the MO of the conscious personality. So in the same way that we as the conscious personality have our own wants and needs and ideas and wisdom and knowledge and all of these different things, these aspects that get split off from our conscious awareness also have their own perspectives and agendas and needs and wisdom. And this is precisely where the self-sabotaging dynamic can come in, because consciously we can want to go in this direction, but we can have different shadow aspects that are in the unconscious that want to pull us in this direction or in that direction, and in directions we don't consciously want to go in. And a metaphor that I like to use to describe this phenomenon is to imagine that you are like a vehicle with many steering wheels. And so you are sort of, as the conscious personality, you're sitting in the driver's seat and you believe that there's only one steering wheel. And then you find you're trying to turn right, but whenever you go to try to turn right, it seems like your car starts to be pulled in a totally opposite direction. But the reality is that there are 8, 9, 10 hidden steering wheels in the trunk that you're not aware of, each manned by a different shadow aspect. One that might be trying to go right as well, another one that might be trying to go straight forward, another one that might be trying to turn the vehicle around, another one that might be trying to go left. And this is when we end up in self-sabotaging dynamics, and we end up facing with lots of resistance, and we end up procrastinating or like being lazy, or any number of different behaviors can come about as a result of these aspects in the shadow trying to pull us in the opposite direction from the one that we consciously want to go in. All right, so that's a little bit about the shadow and how the shadow can cause us to self-sabotage. But let's talk about how we can use shadow work to overcome those self-sabotaging behaviors. Now, with each of these shadow aspects, none of them are actually trying to sabotage you. They just have their own goals and needs and agendas that are very different from the conscious personality's agenda. And they may even have wisdom and knowledge that you as the conscious personality don't yet possess. And so they can sabotage you if you're actually going in a direction that you don't really want to be going in. Or they can sabotage you for their own reasons. So let's say if there's an aspect of you that has, let's say, dealt with some kind of, bore the brunt of some kind of trauma from the past, where it's like maybe you dealt with shame or powerlessness, and then you're trying to move toward a particular goal that you have that maybe might come with a side effect of experiencing shame or powerlessness. So those will tend to pull back on you for that reason. And so what you can do is you can basically use shadow work to become conscious of these aspects and to really understand the deeper seated benevolent intention as to why these aspects are trying to sabotage you. Because from their perspective, they're actually trying to work in your best interest because they are also you. All right, so with all that being said, let's get into the 5 reasons for self-sabotage. Now, the first reason for self-sabotage is that you're actually out of alignment with what it is that you really want. So I call this the truest, deepest will. At a deep level, you know exactly what it is that you want and which direction you want to go in. Now, you might not be conscious of it, but if you start moving in a direction that's out of alignment with your truest, deepest will, there will tend to be self-sabotaging behaviors that come up as a result of that. So let me give you an example to illustrate this. Let's say that Jim is part of a really close-knit family, and basically it's been tradition for many generations that the family business gets passed on from like father to son to son to son and so on down the line. And so like Jim basically inherits the family business when he gets to a certain age. And when he starts to find himself self-sabotaging and doing things for the business that are going to lead to really negative outcomes. And he maybe even finds himself kind of undermining the foundation of the business in certain ways without intending to. But if we look deeper at why Jim is maybe doing this, is because there's perhaps part of him that knows deep down that he doesn't really want to participate in the family business, even though consciously he believes that he does because of his close relationship with his family. And there's a lot of meaning that he associates with inheriting the business. But underneath that, there's part of him that maybe wants to be an architect, wants to move in a totally different direction. And because he's not conscious of that aspect, this aspect basically starts to sabotage his conscious goals of, let's say, keeping the family business afloat and, making sure that the business does well. Now, out of the 5 reasons for self-sabotage, this one tends to be the most difficult to deal with because we oftentimes have to make big, massive changes and we have to really switch things up so that we actually are in alignment with our truest, deepest will. And in this case, Jim would very likely have to become conscious of the part of himself that's aware that he does not want to be part of the family business. And it's going to have to deal with maybe fears of disconnection, lots of discomfort in order to make that shift. So this one would be quite difficult to deal with. But especially if he finds himself sabotaging the business, it's going to be best for him and best for the business if he becomes aware of that and makes those hard changes. Now, with this type of self-sabotage, you can be out of alignment with what it is that you're doing and also the way it is that you're approaching things. So in this example with Jim, it's what he's doing that's out of alignment. He wants to be doing something totally different, but sometimes it's in the way that we're approaching things that we're out of alignment with our truest, deepest will. So for example, let's say that let's say that there's a guy named Dan, and he really wants to be a history teacher. And so he starts teaching a high school history class, but deep down he knows he actually wants to teach college level to people who are really specifically interested in learning about World War II. And in this case, Dan might find himself self-sabotaging his current role as a history teacher on the high school level because deep down he knows he wants to do something else in a different way. Now, if you find yourself self-sabotaging and you want to use shadow work to resolve those underlying reasons, and you believe that you're self-sabotaging because you're not doing the thing that you actually want to do, what you want to do is you want to actually look and discover what your truest, deepest will is, what it is that you really want. And this can be challenging because we have all sorts of shoulds and have tos and all sorts of identities and worldviews that can actually obscure that knowledge from us, where we may not know what it is that we truly want. And so what I recommend for this particular type of self-sabotage is to do an exercise called turning your shoulds into wants. So one of the things that we can get wrapped up in is the sense of shoulds and have tos. And ultimately, there's no such thing as a should or a have to. There's only just consequences that could arise as a result of doing something or not doing something. And so what we're really saying when we're saying, oh, I should do this, or I shouldn't do that, or I have to do this, is we're actually indicating a wanted consequence, or an unwanted consequence. So let's say that somebody decides to go to a job that they hate and they say, oh, okay, I should go to this job. Well, it's not that they should go to the job, it's that they want to have stable employment so that they can live a stable life. So what they really want is they want a financially stable life. And so any should that you have can actually be explored deeper and deeper until you find the root want that's underneath that should. And so if I say, oh, I should exercise, it's like, oh, well, actually, no, I want a fit and healthy body. Or if I say I should brush my teeth every morning, instead, I'd flip that around and say, well, I want a clean and healthy mouth. All right, so just really quick, before we get into the other 4 reasons for self-sabotage, I wanted to let you know that I have a new group coaching program called Shadow Work for Self-Sabotage, and it's for ambitious people who struggle with self-sabotage, procrastination, and just holding themselves back from their full potential. And it's to help them use shadow work to overcome, those blocks at the very roots of things, working with actually the 5 reasons in this very video. And if you happen to be an ambitious person that tends to struggle with self-sabotage, this program is designed to help you pinpoint and resolve those underlying reasons for self-sabotage so that you can have consistent, frictionless motivation to move toward your full potential. And if that sounds like something that you're interested in, I'm going to leave a link down below in the description box where you can go to an information page and learn more about my new program. And if you have any questions about the program, feel free to contact me at thediamondnetchannel@gmail.com. All right, so with that out of the way, we'll go ahead and go into the second reason for self-sabotage, and that is limiting beliefs. So some examples of limiting beliefs could be limiting beliefs about yourself or limiting beliefs about reality at large. So if it's limiting beliefs about yourself, it could be something like, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, it's futile because I'll never figure it out. All of those beliefs would be very, very discouraging. But we can also have beliefs about reality that might hold us back. Like, oh, maybe 10 years ago, I could have been successful with this particular thing that I'm trying to do, but now it's like not good for the market. Or, oh, what's the point in doing anything anyway because nothing matters inherently. Or there's already too many people trying to do the thing that I'm trying to do, and so the market's already saturated, so why even bother? Now, to give a more in-depth example, let's say that Charlotte has a deep-seated underlying belief that nothing really matters. And so whenever she gets sort of like an inspiration to do something interesting, let's say for her career, or she wants to get involved in some kind of personal development work, she always ends up running into a wall that's like, oh, what's the point anyway, because nothing really matters. And so she ends up with this existential kind of limiting belief. Or let's say that Billy was raised in a family where, let's say, his parents were always moving the goalposts so that nothing that he did was ever good enough. Like if he got a 99% on a test, they'd be like, why not 100? And so he developed the belief that it doesn't matter how good he is, it's not going to be enough. And so maybe his belief is I'm never enough. And so when he has, let's say, a certain inspiration pop up, he gets this discouragement because it's like, oh, I'm not enough. It doesn't matter what I do. It's never going to be enough. Now, if you wanted to use shadow work to overcome limiting beliefs and to resolve them, what you would actually want to do is you would want to look at the unconscious hidden function of those beliefs. So if we go back to the example with Charlotte and believing that nothing matters, maybe if we look back that the original function of that belief was because there was maybe a situation where she was in a powerless dynamic and it didn't really matter what it is that she did. She would still be in that negative situation that she was caught in maybe as a child. And oftentimes childhood is an experience of intense powerlessness. And so maybe she was powerless to get certain needs met, or maybe it was almost like trying to, let's say, get the attention, affection, love, validation she needed was futile. And maybe she developed this belief that, oh, everything's meaningless and nothing matters anyway because nothing is going to come of anything that's going to make anything any better because that's what she experienced before. And so she's essentially holding on to that limiting belief to keep herself from getting her hopes up too high and then getting disappointed. And so it's a protection mechanism against disappointment. And so if she knows that that's the underlying reason for that limiting belief, then she has to become more okay with facing into feelings like disappointment and resolving those underlying feelings of disappointment from childhood. And so with that, like if she wants to resolve that belief that's standing in her own way, there's probably some deeper seated emotional dynamics that have to be worked into in order to let that go. Or in the example with Billy, where his parents were always moving the goalposts and it didn't matter what he did, he probably built in this belief of it's never enough so that he could keep going and trying to, let's say, trying to do more and more and more and more to try to be enough. And so there's still part of him that's like, I need to be enough, I need to be enough. And he sort of judges himself as not enough to kind of keep himself moving forward on this like endless journey of trying to be enough and trying to be enough and trying to be enough. And so what he would really have to do is to become conscious of the part of himself that never feels enough and that didn't get the validation and didn't get the connection from his parents. And he would have to actually turn inward to that part of himself and give himself the validation and to give himself the sense of being enough. So it's almost like if there's been an internalization of sort of the external pattern, he would have to shift that internal pattern that he internalized from the external situation in childhood. All right, so reason number 3 for self-sabotage is trying to avoid negative emotions. So let's say that Jerry really wants to be a public speaker, and it's something that he's just really sure that he wants to be a public speaker, but every time he tries to go toward, let's say, taking steps toward getting speaking gigs and things like that, he tends to sabotage his progress. Now, let's say that when Jerry was in elementary school, there were a couple of instances where he was bullied by the whole class and he was made fun of in a very public way. And so that gave him this intense sense of embarrassment, shame, ostracism, all these other really intense emotions. And then maybe, he moved on from that and it wasn't so much of a focus. He didn't even think that this dynamic was really bothering him anymore. And maybe in middle school, he became really outgoing. And, he sort of felt like he'd really shaken that fear of public embarrassment from elementary school. But let's say that now, with this dynamic of wanting to be a public speaker, that puts him in a position where he's going to be in front of a lot of people. And there is a lot of potential for public embarrassment when you're public speaking. That's why so many people are afraid of it. And so there's part of him that wants to sabotage those goals in order to avoid those same feelings of ostracism, embarrassment, and shame from that earlier dynamic with public speaking. And so we will tend to sabotage our conscious goals if we feel like they will come with a side effect of certain negative emotions, especially negative emotions that we experienced earlier on in life. Now, in order to resolve this underlying reason for self-sabotage, what you want to do is you want to actually use somatic work, tune into the body. And I recommend using body scan meditation. So in order to process feelings from the past, so let's say if we take this example with Jerry, and let's say that embarrassment was the main feeling that, that the experience of public embarrassment had. And so what he'd want to do is he'd want to locate where embarrassment happens in the body as a sensation, and then he would want to do the body scan meditation where he focuses on that sensation there in the body. And as he tunes more in, that's what enables that emotion to sort of process in the nervous system. All right, now the 4th reason for self-sabotage is lack of self-trust. Now, with lack of self-trust, this tends to come about when we consciously put ourselves into situations that are over our boundaries, or we don't tend to tune into our body, or we're not very well attuned to our unconscious mind. And so our conscious mind, our executive function, tries to bring us into directions that we don't consciously feel comfortable with or don't want to go in. And so what ends up happening is that we sort of develop this lack of self-trust, and we don't, let's say, follow our own guidance. So oftentimes we think about the loss of trust in a sort of an opposite way to which it actually goes. So let's say that I say, oh, I'm going to go to the gym every day this week. And let's say that I go for the first 2 days and I stop going. And I go, oh man, I'm breaking my promises to myself. And that must be how I'm breaking my trust to myself. But actually, it happens the other way around. We break our promises to ourselves because we lack trust in ourselves. We don't lack trust in ourselves because we've broken our promises. So if we've led ourselves in the wrong direction, or we have thrown ourselves under the bus, or we've had a tendency to, let's say, push ourselves over our own boundaries, or we're not very well attuned to our needs, what will happen is we will tend to rebel from our conscious goals. Give an example. Let's say that Alyssa holds the value of really valuing transparency and honesty. And her conscious mind is really held on to this idea of valuing transparency. But deep down, there's a part of herself that has certain things that she wants to keep private, that she doesn't feel comfortable actually sharing with other people. And then Alyssa, let's say, maybe has like an audience. Maybe she's like on social media or YouTube or something like this. And she goes and she shares things about herself that she's deep down, she's not feeling comfortable sharing those things. But because of her value that she holds around 100% transparency, she shares a lot of details about herself that she does not actually feel comfortable sharing. And let's say after the fact that Alyssa finds herself totally sabotaging. Maybe like she closes up some of her social media accounts, or like, let's say she avoids, let's say, making videos or, you know, putting out content on social media, or she ends up like finding some other way to sabotage it. And that's because deep down, part of her doesn't feel comfortable with her, you know, feels like, oh, you're going to share things that I don't feel comfortable with, so I'm going to rebel from you. And basically both being the same person here. So like, let's say if there's the executive decision-making part, then there's this other part. It's almost like if the executive decision-making part makes decisions that are over this other part's boundaries, that part is going to rebel. And so in order to resolve this underlying issue, what we have to do is we have to regain our own trust. And we do that by attuning deeply to our body. We do that by attuning deeply to the unconscious mind, and by being very, very aware of where our boundaries are. And what that means is that when we run into resistance, we listen to that resistance. We don't try to like railroad over that resistance. We really listen to it and try to understand the root cause of where it's coming from so that we can work with it instead of against it. All right, and the fifth and final reason why we tend to sabotage our conscious goals is because our needs aren't incorporated into our action plan. So that means, like, if we look at, like, let's say Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I like to use that framework because it's a really simple, like, sort of framework to use. So if we think about, like, let's say we have our physiological needs, we have our safety needs, we have our love and belonging needs, we have esteem needs, and then we have self-actualization needs. If we build out a vision of what it is that we would like to achieve, and we have a lot of goals, but we don't incorporate each one of those needs into that vision, or we sacrifice, let's say, some of those needs in that vision, we will tend to find ways to sabotage so that we can keep getting those needs met in the status quo. So for example, let's say that Jackson wants to start a business. So right now, Jackson's like, he doesn't have a lot of money, and he's living with roommates, and he's having to carpool to go to work, and he's having to do his laundry at a public laundromat, and he works in, like, you know, a busy kind of restaurant workplace and things like that. And so he would really love to live a life of solitude. And so his plan is, okay, I want to have a successful business so I can work for myself, so I don't have to go to work around all these other people. And I want to be able to have enough money so that I can have my own place where I can live alone, and I can have my own car, and I don't have to carpool to go to work, and I don't have to do my laundry at the laundromat because I have my own washer and dryer. And so his idea is that the more money that he gets, the more that he can live the life of solitude that he consciously wants. But because connection and belonging is a need that's deeply wired into each and every single one of us, and there's never been a time in human history up until maybe the past 50, 60 years or so that we could really even have the illusion of living by ourselves. Like, we have these deep, like, needs for other people to be around us. And so there's a part of him that he's not conscious of that actually is aware that he needs that connection and is aware that he values connection, even if consciously he doesn't think about himself that way. And so this aspect of himself knows that if he makes that money, what he's going to do is he's going to go away from all of those different sources of connection. So he's not going to be going to work in a public office. He's not going to be living with roommates. He's not going to be carpooling. He's not going to be going to the laundromat. And he's going to be all by himself. And this part of himself, even though he consciously doesn't know that he needs connection, doesn't value connection, this part of him really does. And so that part is probably going to sabotage his business goals, you know, every step of the way. And he might end up in a space where every time he wants to sit down and do something toward his business, he procrastinates, or he goes and scrolls on social media, or he gets really tired and he's like, oh, I need to take a nap. And so all of these things might happen if he he doesn't incorporate those needs for connection into his vision. So what he would have to do is he would have to become aware of all of his needs, so we can use shadow work and different processes like that to kind of question, like, what are my needs? Noticing, let's say, ways that, like, let's say those Maslow's hierarchy of needs aren't being met. And then find ways to actually like incorporate that into the action plan. All right, so that's it for now. If you're interested in learning more about my shadow work group program, Shadow Work for Self-Sabotage, go ahead and click the link below. And also, you might want to check out this video as well, which has a lot to do with the underlying reasons for self-sabotage. So I highly recommend it. It's going to be over here or over here. And keep becoming more you.